Now, this afternoon's speaker next is Larry Harris from Lancaster, Ohio, who's been trying in his own way and radio stations and everything to warn people about the potential of that hazard. And I want to start by asking Larry to answer me a couple of questions. You were raided by whom, about when? Your laboratory was raided. Oh, you got the mic. You don't have to use it.
My personal laboratory was raided the first part of May of 1995. I was doing research on how one goes about defending themselves against biological warfare. I was starting to find things very, very disturbing in that how other nations was obtaining biological warfare agents, and the very agencies that were here to supposed to protect the American people against the ravages of biological warfare were in fact the very agencies arming our enemies with biological warfare.
Now what were they looking for in that raid? What did they have, a search warrant?
They had a search warrant.
What did it say they were looking for?
Basically, when they came into the house, they were searching for strain of bacteria that I used in my research. Primarily what they were looking in the house for, I used to work for the company. About 6 years, very deep was a microbiologist for the company. And while at the company, I used to keep notebooks. All microbiologists, scientists keeps notebooks. Instead of letting my laboratory desk get cluttered up, I used to bring the notebooks home, throw them in the bottom of the closet. After I left the company, I still had those notebooks. From the notebooks, I was writing a manual, how one goes about defending against biological warfare. They were tearing the place apart trying to get those manuals.
That's what they were after?
They were after the manuals.
Did they get them?
Yes, they did.
And what did you do? Did you ever get them back?
Basically, I had already transcribed the manuals onto a disk, computer disk. The computer disk had already been distributed up to 2 other locations. They came in, they totally erased the memory of my computer. All my computer disks were gone, but the backup disk they didn't get.
Okay, take it from there. Larry Harris, bring him on with some more applause, please.
May rightly ask, how does one get interested in biological warfare, and how does one actually develop a very strong affection for bacteria and disease? Okay, I was born and raised in the hills of southwestern Virginia. Having lost my parents when I was a very, very small boy, I was adopted by my grandparents when I was less than 2 years of age, who were very, very well blessed in years when they took me to raise. My grandparents had had the misfortune of going through the Great Swine Flu epidemic in 1918. Give you a little history of that. My grandfather was in the Army in 1918. He was stationed at Vancouver, Washington, when the swine flu first came ashore. When the swine flu first came to this country, it's very, very mild. You caught it, you felt a little rough for a day or so. Nothing real big, no big problem. But then same in Texas, a few Army bases were reporting everybody sick with the flu, nobody missing work. Again, very benign flu. But these soldiers were all bound, most of them were bound for the trenches of Europe. In those trenches of Europe, they were being exposed to mustard gas, chemical warfare. Mustard gas is a known mutagen. Within a matter of days, the flu had mutated and turned into a very vicious killer that was known as the Spanish Maiden. When the doughboys, as the World War I troops were known, returned home, they spread the swine flu across America. And my grandfather had just returned home. Him and my grandmother just started setting up housekeeping when the swine flu hit the community. Single road going through the community, row of houses on either side, row houses. One side was known as the Titanic, the other side was known as Noah's Ark. And the people started coming down with the flu. Then within a few days, people began dying. My grandfather, because he had already received the flu in its mild form, was immune. So was both of his brothers. And so they started to help the undertaker dig graves. A few days later, they buried the undertaker. But then they started digging graves as fast as they could. They were starting putting one person in an individual grave, but within a day, they was having to put 2 and 3 members of a family in a common grave. Soon they were having to bury entire families in a common grave. Within a day or so, their strength started to be given out. The edge of town, there was a little diner that were the miners. They put wash tubs on the stove and put meat and potatoes in to make a soup so they could carry around to people to eat. There's very few people there who could literally cook, who could even walk. And they had an old freight wagon, and they hooked the freight wagon up at the end of each afternoon. My grandfather took the bell up the school mom's desk and would go through the town ringing the bell, "Bring out the dead, bring out the dead." They brought the dead out. They would roll it up in sheets and throw the bodies into the back of a freight wagon. They rolled the freight wagon into a coal mine. They started stacking the bodies up literally like cordwood. When the flu had finally burned itself out, the swine flu completely encircled the earth in 9 months, a great pan-epidemic. 25 million people that we know of died. So 25 million, literally. As I grew up as a small boy, my grandmother over and over kept having nightmares of the great flu returning, the great plague, she said, the great plague returning to our land. And they devoted the last years of their life to raising me, with one promise, that I would devote myself to microbiology. She said, "In my dreams, I see the plague keep coming back." So in high school, when I got out of high school, I joined the Army with an agreement that they could find me a place in a microbiology laboratory to work in. I literally built my own microbiology laboratory when I was a small boy. I literally used to trap muskrat pelts to buy my first microscope. The used one, an old Spencer, but it was a very fine microscope. We literally lived in the hills of Virginia. I literally grew up in a cabin in the hills. But my beloved grandmother, my grandfather, I always kept my promise to him. And so in the Army, I went into Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Aberdeen Proving Grounds, I would work in biological warfare defense. I would have nothing to do with offense. I worked through Aberdeen Proving Grounds. After I got out of the military, the Army arranged me to go to Ohio State University and also work in another laboratory. See, in 1972, when I got out of the Army, we signed an international treaty banning biological warfare, offense, defense, all phases of it. So what the CIA did, they busted it up in little bitty compartments. They took it out of Fort Detrick, then started spreading it around to all, because, you see, the 1972 ban on biological warfare was between nations. It had nothing to do with individual private corporations. And so we started spreading it around to small private laboratories. I worked in a private lab there through my college days. When I graduated, I went to Florida for a while and actually worked in a small community laboratory for a few years. In '85, a recruiter, we call them headhunters, come knocking on the door. He was a headhunter for the company. And he said, sent me down for lunch. He said, "Here, I'll give you some simple mathematics that you can understand. Drew a line, this is your salary. That's a multiplication sign, that's 2. Are you interested?" So I went back working for the company again. Started in '85. We went back to a small private research laboratory out in the middle of nowhere next to Coshocton, Ohio. Small agriculture research center. This laboratory, by the way, was set up as a reference laboratory for the company, CIA. What we did, when they would find a bacteria out in nature somewhere, out in the field somewhere, that could possibly have been used as a biological warfare agent, they would send it into us. We were a reference lab. Our job was to identify the bacteria, find out what antibiotic treated it with. We'd run an HPLC of it, which gave us a profile of the bacteria, and then we would take put it in their computers. In '86, '87, we started getting a lot of Iraqi microbiologists was assigned to our laboratory. We was told that the Ayatollah Khomeini was getting ready to carry out a massive biological war attack against our allies, the Iraqis. And we had to defend the poor Iraqis against a biological warfare attack. And so we were training their microbiologists in our lab in every phase of biological warfare. 1988, side note, I tested a bacteria that came up from Texas. It was a strange bug, a mycoplasma. Mycoplasma, we later called fermentis. I ran a simple test of it, got down the symptoms of it, locked it in my computer, and literally forgot about it for a while. In 1991, actually 90, when Saddam Hussein went back into Kuwait, our microbiologists, Iraqi microbiologists, lost their security clearance, of course, and was out of the laboratory. Spring 91, late spring. Doctor at Mansfield General Hospital called me. He said, Larry, I got a couple of patients up here with the craziest diseases ever seen in their life. It looks like they've got someone threw scalded water on them. They have essentially scalded skin syndrome. Another lady had ulcers all over her body. And so he said, I've sent samples to the reference laboratory. I can't find anything wrong with it. You might come in. Well, what do you need? He said, I said, okay, I'll need at least 20 milliliters of blood from each girl. Went up and got the blood, brought it back to the lab, spun it down, run an HPLC on the blood. Then I fed it into the computer. The computer, within a few seconds, got a match. It was a mycoplasma fermentus, later called incognitus, biological warfare agent that had been developed by Roston Perrine down in Texas, manufactured by the Tanex Corporation, which is rumored to be owned by George Bush, James Baker III, and sold in huge quantities to Saddam Hussein. Come to find out, the only common denominator these two women had, their husbands worked and flew for the Air National Guard out of Mansfield. They flew tankers in the Persian Gulf. They had caught the bacteria, brought it back, and infected their wives. Their wives, in turn, had totally come down with it. As soon as I found out that it was a biological warfare agent, I started raising some cane. My section chief told me to drop it. Drop it right now. I would not drop it. I kept pushing hard. Latter part of July, I came into the laboratory. The laboratory was gone. They handed me my personal effects in a plastic bag and my severance pay. Goodbye. All the other microbiologists were transferred except myself. There was no transfer position for me. So I used the opportunity. I returned to college, Ohio State University. When I returned to college, I want to take some advanced courses in microbiology. Sitting there the very first day, looking and the first couple seats down from me was Miriam Arif, one of my students, what I've been training in the laboratory. We chuckled at each other. We was both in the same laboratory. Again, we become very close friends. And we ran together as a clique. And so fast forward, that was in September 91. Fast forward to February of 93. I had arrived early to college that morning to get me a parking spot in a very rapidly filling parking lot. And you didn't get there early, you didn't get a park, or you got in a fight over getting the parking spot. And so I was there, and this is the Monday after the World Trade Center had been blown up. I went in, and Miriam was always very clean, very proper, had very manners about her. And Miriam had an unusual background. Her very close relative had once been the president of Iraq. He was killed in a mysterious plane crash back in 60s, late 67, something like that. Series of coups in which her families had not fared too well in those coups. As a matter of fact, several have been hanged. She had told me on a couple instances she thought it'd be safer for her to be in the United States until she could do something to make her famous back in her own country of Iraq. That morning, when I got in, Miriam, sitting in the coffee shop, really looked a mess. Looked like she hadn't had a bath for a week, had bags under her eyes, literally just a wreck. I knew she was Iraqi, and I kind of walked up to her and said, "Hey, Miriam, you guys blow that building?" You know, talking about the World Trade Center. It was a poor joke, but it was a joke. And she almost jumped out of her skin and literally turned as white as a ghost. She looked in the air, mumbling for a few minutes, and she said, "Larry, you're a dear and trusted friend. And what I'm going to tell you the next few minutes, I want you to listen very closely, because you can use it to save your own life and a few lives of your friends. Because when it comes my time to act, I do not want your death to be upon my conscience." Miriam at that point in time went on to had told me she had since 1991, since her own country had been stomped into the ground, had gone into full biological warfare offense. We had trained them in defense. Now they were going full biological warfare offense. You see, in the Persian Gulf, when I asked her about the World Trade Center, she said, "I am sure that my beloved Iraq did not do this thing, because when it comes time to pay back the great Satan, we will demand at least one American life for every one of my countrymen that you butchered." And so basically, I asked her about biological war. I said, about the biological warfare. She knew about what she knew about biological warfare. And I said, "Did Iraq use biological warfare in the Gulf? And she said, yes, most definitely. We use the slow-acting biologicals, Mycoplasma fermentis incognitus, that was sold to Iraq. They used the slow-acting biologicals. The reason that they did not use the fast-acting biologicals is that the wind shifted on the key date. They was getting ready to release the anthrax, the plague, the poison gas. The wind shifted and was blowing back towards Iraq. And also Iraq did not have air superiority, and they could not release the biologicals. They had a couple of Scud missiles blown out of the sky, and it rained down on their troops and affected a whole bunch of guys. But they could not use the fast-acting biologicals. You may remember the Gulf War, though, was going at a very feverish pace, and all of a sudden it stopped. The reason that it stopped, Saddam Hussein had nothing to lose. He was already loaded their artillery shells with the anthrax. He had loaded his special aircraft with the anthrax. He had loaded the Scuds with the anthrax, plague, all the other fast-acting biologicals, and the winds had turned. The winds are now favorable, blowing towards the enemy. And he made the coalition forces an offer they could not refuse. And so the war come to an end. But unbeknownst to us and our stupidity to go in the Gulf to begin with, the Muslims had been for over 20 years predicting, the Muslim Sufis, that the great Satan was going to strike the heel of Allah sometime in the 90s. The heel of Allah was also a ridge area where Saddam Hussein had his underground headquarters at. For over 1,000 years it was known as the heel of Allah. They said when the great Satan strikes the heel of Allah, they will set off a Muslim timetable based upon the Holy Quran, especially the book of Daniel, and the teachings of Muhammad, in which 3 holy periods will arise, holy seasons. The first date of these dates will come up in July of 97. This here starts the beginning of the Holy War, the Jihad. And to give you a little this is a quick sideline here. This happened a few days in Mecca. This here was on May the 31st. 2 million Muslims gathered on Mount Arafat outside of Saudi Arabia's most holy city of Mecca to pray for the destruction of the United States and Israel at the gathering of the pilgrims. Tens of thousands of Iranians gathered and chanted, death to America, death to Israel. Mohammad Rada Shah, the head of the Iranian pilgrims, said, we're gathered here today to show our hatred and anger at the great Satan, America. They're declaring the holy jihad. The war is on. Go back with Miriam. I was asking Miriam, I said, how would such a biological warfare be attacked, be taking place? Miriam stated that our country does not have intercontinental ballistic missiles. We do not have the missiles to carry the bombs into your country. We do, though, have students going here to the college. Miriam said that she had made 5 trips all the way to Iraq and back. Every time she was returning from Iraq, she was carrying a vial of either bubonic plague or cholera in body cavity. This is actually one of the vials here. The primarily anthrax or plague are being smuggled back into the country. The Iraqis had set up what is known as cell groups. Each cell consists of 11 members, 1 man or 1 woman and 10 men. The woman acts as a courier. She herself brings in the biological warfare agents. And also when the times come, she will be the one that does the initial activation of the biological warfare agent. Then it would be distributed out to the men. Miriam said in 93, we knew of over 100 cells that had already been established within the United States. And I was asking Mary, how exactly will you carry out an attack? I thought she was joking. Tell me precisely how you go about carrying out a biological attack. She said it is very easy. These little vials that their women have been smuggling back into the United States. They smuggle them in a body cavity. As soon as they get them here, they remove them. All they do is tie a string around the neck, slide them up in the body cavity, bingo. They cannot be detected being brought into the country. And then, once an attack is they were prepared to carry out an attack. The only thing the lady does is go to the refrigerator. She'll take 2 milliliters of skim milk, 2 milliliters of distilled water, and pour into the vial. They set the vial off to the side. They then take a 125 milliliter flask. They put 100 milliliters of water in it. They take a dehydrated nutrient broth powder, which, by the way, can be bought anywhere in the country, no questions asked. Mail order, by the way. Visa, American Express, all of those. Dump it in, put it on a heated shaker table, and let it agitate for about 8 or 9 days. They use bubonic plague to begin with. They use a binary agent that's known as a Russian cocktail. The bubonic plague and anthrax. Bubonic plague takes 3 days for the symptoms to manifest themselves. Anthrax takes 2 days for the symptoms to manifest themselves. They grow the anthrax first, the bubonic plague, up in a flask like this. Then they take 12 milliliter screw-top test tubes. They put 10 milliliters from the flask into screw-top test tubes like that. They merely tie a string around the neck of the tube, slide it up in the body cavity, and transport it. Very easily, very quickly. And while they're doing it, the girls are taking tetracycline. That way, if one of the vials would leak, they have no danger whatsoever coming down with the plague or the anthrax. Each cell member, again, has 10 men. Each man goes out and purchases 3 stainless steel pump-up spray cans, or we've had a little extra time, so they've got a little bit more advanced. They're actually using chemostats now. They would go out and purchase 3 chemostats. A chemostat, 5-gallon container, and ideally, Miriam said they use the spray tanks, so I'll go with the spray tanks. This one was captured recently. They would take 3 5-gallon pump-up spray cans, pour 4.5 gallons of water into each tank. These tanks would put on top of a stove eye. They bring them to a boil. They remove the air pump from the center, and the spray tanks they use to spray bugs with. They will then pour the nutrient broth powder into the tank. Let it boil. They'll take a pressure cooker, take 3 towels, put in the pressure cooker, sterilize the towels. These are then placed over top of the tank to maintain sterility. They'll take an aquarium air stone that you get at the aquarium shop, drop the air stone down into the tank, run it over to an air pump. Then, these are all sterility. Then they set them off, let it cool to room temperature. Take a heating pad like you use for your back. Put the heating pad around the tank to bring the temperature at 35 degrees centigrade. Now, when the girl shows up, the girl will basically brings it in body cavity, brings it into the apartment, goes in the restroom, withdraws it, hands it to him. He takes it, opens it, comes over to the flask or to the tank, opens the tank like so. He's already got his water in. He's already got the dehydrated nutrient broth powder rehydrated in. Pours 3.5 milliliters into each tank. This is then permitted to set and what we call it ferment. What that means is grow for 3 days, with plague 9 days. Then after 8 to 9 days, the anthrax crews start. Anthrax, again, is a bacteria. Do the same exact procedure. The anthrax crews rehydrate the vial, put it into the container like so, transfer it into the vials, place it into the tanks. Miriam said many of the cell members had already been trained how to fly airplanes, by the way, that we gave them. Cessna 150s, by the way, because they said they've been trained to run onto the airport early in the morning, go up to the right of the engine cowling, open the engine cowling, reach in with a pair of wire cutters, cut the 2 magneto kill wires, go around, pop the door open with a screwdriver, untie the airplane. If necessary, prime the engine, fire the hand prop the airplane, fly it to another base. They then take recording tape, grind the recording tape up into fine powder, mix it with shellac, and paint the airplane with it. That way, when the radar waves strike it, it's absorbed into the matrix and the plane becomes invisible to radar. They take Venturis. These Venturis can be acquired here in the country, no questions asked. They either with airplanes will bolt these onto the right landing gear strut of the airplane, or bolt them underneath of a car, down underneath, and run your tubing up inside the car. Once the attack starts taking place on day 1, the plague crews will start off. The plague crews merely jump in the car, go streaming down the road, just like the highway running up in front of the building out here. And then, as they're going by, they reach over and crack the valve a little bit. The wind blowing through here produces a tremendous suction and draws the plague into here. As the plague or the anthrax drawn into here, it's vaporized and it's blowed out the back of it as a very fine mist, as a fog, a very powerful fog of death. There's no boom, there's no bang, there is no taste, there is no smell, no indication of anything that's going wrong. At the end, on the second day, then they release anthrax. Bubonic plague takes 3 days for the symptoms to manifest themselves. Anthrax, 2 days for the symptoms to manifest themselves. Give you an idea how effective one of these are. One of these, if you went up the Hudson River, spraying out around Manhattan, spraying it out as a spray, within 48 hours, just using anthrax, in excess of 400,000 people will be dead. There's no smell, taste, boom. And once you start showing the symptoms, you are dead. Plain and simple, you are dead. They used plague first, symptoms of plague. First off, after 3 days, you'll start coughing up blood. Get a dry cough, then you start coughing up blood. Every time you cough, you spew more bubonic plague out into the air. Every time someone breathes that plague in, 3 days later, they'll also be down with the plague. Anthrax. You breathe the anthrax in, it's a bacteria. It starts growing in your lungs. 1/10 of 1/1,000,000th of a gram is fatal. And so it starts growing in your lungs. Then you will start getting flu-like symptoms. Then you will develop a burning high fever. Then the bacteria will break out of your lungs into the bloodstream, where they release a complement-fixing compound which causes all the blood in your body to coagulate. It's known as disseminated intravascular coagulation. Or it releases another compound that will cause all the blood vessels in your bodies to burst, lice, interhemorrhagic fever. Anyway, once the symptoms manifest themselves, I could give you all the, like plague. You come in, just where I could barely get a diagnosis, you had pulmonary plague. If I gave you enough antibiotics to kill all the plague bacteria in your lungs, they'll release enough toxins that will knock out your liver, your kidneys, your spleen, your pancreas. You are dead. Or it will release enough toxins that knocks out your lung tissue, which your lung tissue stops working. Your skin turns to a black color due to oxygen starvation. That's why they called it the Black Death in Europe. Either way, you are dead. Same with anthrax. If I give you enough antibiotics to kill all the anthrax in your body, it still releases enough toxins. You are literally dead. That is plain and simple. And so people can say, what is the proof that this was actually taking place? It's actually, for me, sitting here talking about it, what other proof we just have this is kind of interesting. This article here, just to pay U.S. Today, experts expect germ warfare attack. The bacteria they're using, anthrax, plague, cholera, tularemia. Exactly what Miriam told me they were doing. A friend of mine just got through touring Dugway Proving Grounds. At Dugway Proving Grounds, this is where they experiment with biological warfare defense. The people said the only thing they're experimenting with is anthrax, plague, tularemia. And what is very interesting is that when asked, what are you doing for the civilian population? They said there is not one dime, 1 penny, 1 foot of laboratory space, anything being devoted to civil defense in any way, size, shape, or form. The same exact thing that I found out several years ago. My research in the laboratory had to be doing with biological warfare defense. All my books was in biological warfare defense. I transcribed the books and put it into a defense manual. The book that I produced, Biological Warfare, A Major Threat to North America, this is a how-to book. How to defend against biological warfare. How to get the antibiotics, how to prepare the antibiotics, how to recognize the symptoms that attack has taken place, how to go about defending against it. We also got a videotape, 2-hour videotape, not just me talking about it, but other leading scientists around the country talking about the same thing. After Miriam told me about the attack, I started going to various people, talking to other individuals around the corporations around the world. Come to find out, you may be interested where Miriam said they got all their anthrax from. They bought it right here in the United States. American Type Culture Collection, Rockville, Maryland, had sold enough anthrax to Iraq to kill everybody in the world 10 times over. Last October, we followed 2 Iraqi students from Baghdad. They were taken off of a plane in Vancouver, Washington. They took them and did a body cavity search. One girl was carrying a vial of bubonic plague. The other girl was carrying a vial of anthrax. Written on the side of the vial was the American Type Culture Collection, Rockville, Maryland. Lot number, the whole 9 yards. Also, we had, where did they get all the other major biological components? Whack and Hunt Corporation, California, owned by the Hercules Corporation, sold tremendous amount of biological warfare agents to the Middle East. And guess what they can do to the 2 girls they caught out in Washington? Nothing. There was no laws, rules, regulations governing the possession, the transport, or growing of biological warfare agents. None whatsoever. Some extremely powerful, very, very wealthy corporations had gone to great lengths to make sure no laws were passed because they were getting very, very rich. And see, how much damage could a biological warfare attack do? We ran models with the military here, and that's on the tape. We ran the models with the military. And we said from 100 cells would give us 1,000 points of release across the United States. 1,000 points of release. The computer model showed that if we knew the day of the attack, the hour of the attack, the minute of the attack, the second of the attack, we're going to lose 180 million people. If we do not know the day of the attack, but only know when people start falling dead, we're going to lose 230 million people. Now, I might ask a good question. How long does a plague last after plague is sprayed out? This plague's not that bad. Once plague is sprayed out, within 24, 48 hours, it starts dying. And the biggest danger is it's a gift that keeps on giving. You catch it, you give it to your neighbor, he gives it to everybody else. In other words, it is highly infectious. Now, what about anthrax? Anthrax has got a little bit longer shelf life, approximately 5,000 years. We had an island off the Scottish coast where we dropped an anthrax bomb on in 1942. 6 acres squared, and I've been told it's flat as a pancake. We have used every known method known to mankind to decontaminate that island. It is still uninhabitable to this day, and every year 2 to 3 people die from spores being blown off that island. Now, how do you decontaminate a city if you cannot decontaminate an island? Now, let's bring us a little up to date now. In the first part of February this year, we was getting next to Ramadan. And later part of the month, I got a call from some friends of mine I knew with the agency. They said, we got some equipment for you. Come to find out, up in Iowa, there's a little college up there known as Ames, Iowa. It's got approximately 12,000, I've been told, 12,000 Middle Eastern students that attend that university. Now, apparently the Iraqis had a problem. They had a loose cannon situation on their hand. They had 3 cell members who was getting ready to move on their own. That's how we caught them. We went up there the first, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, the second week of February. They picked up 3 Iraqi cell leaders. The people who picked those up and did the interrogation, put it this way, they were not read the Miranda Act. Basically, then, latter part of that week, they picked up 14 girls. The way they picked them up, they had an ID of the girls. They drove up on a street in a black van, jerked them in a van. They took them to a secluded location where they strapped them down to an exam table with their arms strapped to the sides, belt across the waist, and they stripped them from the waist down, locked their legs in the vise, spread their legs, and then they did a pelvic exam. They didn't really care how loud they screamed either. So they also, of the girls they captured, 7 of the girls were found to be active couriers. 2 of the girls they found lyophilized, dehydrated vials of anthrax. 5 of the girls, however, had the 12 milliliter screw top test tubes, each test tube containing approximately 10 milliliters of military grade anthrax. Then on a Thursday and Friday that week, they started doing house-to-house searches. And while they was doing one of the house-to-house searches, one of the EMTs noticed a woman who ran to the back of the apartment, split the screen open, and jumped out the door or out the window. Somebody inside read her a silver vessel. This one here. And a funnel-shaped device, this Venturi I'm holding right here. She ran over and hid it behind a dumpster. Not in a dumpster, but behind a dumpster, and covered it. The EMT went over and grabbed it later and stuck it in the back of the EMT, the rescue squad. When the Pegasus team got through going out and rounding up the people, they didn't inventory this one. The 2 gentlemen said they thought this would be in all the press everywhere. But nothing, absolutely nothing. They'd heard me talking about it before. I got a phone call. That was Thursday afternoon next week. The guy said, early in the morning, said, Mr. Harris, you going to be there that afternoon? I said, yes. I thought it was just a phone call. I got a phone call later that afternoon from the drone of the engine. I knew it was either an aircraft or a very large truck. It was an aircraft. They asked me to meet him at the local airstrip. They had out there, they flew in with a Mooney Mark 21. The guy identified himself, and he handed me these two containers here, this vessel. This was a vessel here, by the way, it's interesting. It was manufactured by the Millipore Corporation in Bedford, Massachusetts, manufactured in the late 80s, and sold by the hundreds to Saddam Hussein. This was manufactured by the Air Corps Corporation here in the United States, and sold by the hundreds to Saddam Hussein for allegedly crop dusting activity. These, in turn, were brought back into the United States by the students. Notice the hoses was ripped off, pulled apart here. The girl was in an incredible rush to get it out of the house. When we opened the container and did a test on it, I want to make sure it didn't have anthrax in it at that time. The fluid in the bottom of it turned out to be nutrient broth. These containers, folks, were up, warm, running, waiting for the anthrax to be delivered. Those 5 girls that they picked up, they had the 12 milliliter vials up inside them. That vials were destined for this container right here. One of those vials. Had it been got into this container, and then this device here either mounted underneath the car or out on an aircraft strut of an aircraft. Again, one of these containers will take out 300,000 to 400,000 people. That's using a commercial paint sprayer, which is very inefficient. This little jewel here is much more efficient. You know, Yankee ingenuity. And you can easily get upwards of 1 million people if you're doing it just right with one of these devices. What you're looking at here is the equivalent of a hydrogen bomb. But the thing about only where it differs with a hydrogen bomb is the building's still standing. With a hydrogen bomb, however, the radiation drops off within 6 weeks where you can go back in the area. With this, with anthrax, you can go back in the area after about 5,000 years. Basically, once the anthrax has been released, once the biological material, we got this, they provided me with this container, also with detailed pictures of the girls being searched, and very vivid detail. And he said, whatever you do, don't take the pictures back to your house. The pictures were then, I went to the mailbox, sent them to a friend, which I used as a drop, and they got the pictures. They got an empty envelope, no negatives. We got the container, however. We did get the container. And basically, we'll start bringing us forward. Again, this was February. That was Ramadan. Here we have just passed another holy day. The 15th of last month in July, the Iraqis, the big Muslim clerics, had already declared a jihad, a holy war on America. And we sent, in the Persian Gulf, we sent Saddam Hussein a little calling card. It was called 12 Big Boomers Nuclear Submarines. They invited Iraq to send 2 reconnaissance aircraft escorted by Tomcats out over the Gulf. 11 nuclear submarines surfaced, one after the other. They told Saddam Hussein, your fault, my fault, nobody's fault. We get hit with germs, you're going to get incinerated. We also had our diplomatic teams went into Syria, Libya, all the other Middle Eastern countries, made them the same offer. It's not going to be like Lockerbie, Scotland, where they blew up the airliner. We were just after the person who put the bomb on board. We believe that Ayatollah Khomeini gave the order to put the bomb on board in retaliation for us shooting down the Airbus in '88. But he said it's not going to be that way. Whichever the country is of source, who releases the germs, orders the germs to be released, we are going to incinerate. Plain and simple, we are going to incinerate. The problem we're running into as we sit here and talk now is that when you had nuclear weapons, you had control over these nuclear weapons. In other words, before you could release an atomic bomb, in other words, or an intercontinental ballistic missile, you had to have the launch code. You had to know how to launch the missiles. You had to have a team effort to go in and insert the launch keys, turn the keys to get the missile out of the silo and on its way. Only thing you need with this is a young lady bringing the vial into the country. We took Air Force volunteers, some women. They put the vials up in the body cavity and let them walk through every known detector that we had in existence. And not a single detector could find the vial, even though we knew they were carrying it. And even with a CAT scan, when we turned the gain up on a CAT scan, the only thing we seen was more pelvis. That's it. The other day, we did catch a few more girls. I think 3 or 4 the other day, a few days ago. We knew the girls would be taking antibiotics, terramycin. And so we came up with a breath analyzer that we sniffed the breath for the telltale signs of an antibiotic. As soon as we found it, they searched several of the ladies. They found a few more vials. But the situation is they're already here now. And I've been working very closely with the casualty management teams of the Pentagon, asking what are they going to do, what is the plans for America with the casualty management teams. They got some lovely surprises in store for us. Very heartwarming. Basically, understand, once the biologicals have been released in an area, there's no smell, there's no taste, there's no boom, there is no kabam. Here, a few days ago, in the National Security, in the Government Executive Magazine, the National Security section, they said flat out, biological weapons, once released, there'll be virtually no detection of them. And then we have to, 1, stop the spread of those diseases once they are detected. 2, that people in those areas are most likely infected, but there's nothing to be done for them. They're walking dead. And so the plans of the casualty management team are this. Those people become immediately, whenever we're hit with a biological attack, we become a victim of war, casualty of war. And they said these people are walking dead. They're already corpses. We must start taking acceptable losses. The plans for acceptable losses are this. In areas that hit, they shut off the electricity to that area. They shut off the communication to that area. Then they dropped what is known as a hypobarometric fuel air bomb and cauterized the area. A fuel air bomb is a device about the size of a Volkswagen. It comes down and explodes. It sucks all the air out of the air, oxygen out of the air, and incinerates everything from a 1 mile radius. You see, with the bodies, you can't bury the bodies. You have to burn them. And so, some friends of mine was asking me, trying to find out about the fuel air bombs. We're trying to get information out to the people. And a friend of mine with, again, the casualty management team, I asked me, I said, tell me, can you tell me where some of these fuel air bombs are? Just let me know. And he says, yes, Larry, I'll give you latitude and longitude. Come to find out, he said up next to Rome, Veronica Airport, in the upper state New York, there's an old military base up there. It had been essentially abandoned. These were underground igloos for storing munitions in. It had been abandoned for several years. So, but what they've been doing now, they've revamped that area. I said, he gave me the latitude and longitude of it. We had friends of ours in the communities up there went in and scouted the area out. 4th of July weekend, myself and one other guy got together. We had the latitude and longitude, and the airplane, the Mooney, had a global positioning system in it. We logged in the latitude and longitude. We flew up there. We figured on the 4th of July, any guards there is going to be ticked off. They're on guard duty anyhow. And so we timed the day to get there to around 12 o'clock noon. And we could not believe our luck. There's a small landing strip there inside where the armory was. And we seen the guards leaving in a pickup truck to go get something to eat. We literally brought the airplane in as silent as we could and set her down. Landed inside the base, and I jumped out and started taking pictures. The pictures are back at the desk. We literally got the pictures of the bunkers where they're storing the fuel air bombs, the new railhead to carry the fuel air bombs out to the airstrip, the bomb carrier, the overhead bridge crane, everything. We have since located 3 of these across the United States. And people said, this is extremely cruel. How could people use a fuel air bomb? I understand people. They say, we got antibiotics. Yes, we do have antibiotics. My book shows you how to go out and get antibiotics, stockpile for yourself. If they hit a single city, like New York City, using our current medical practices that we have right now, we would exhaust this nation's entire antibiotic supply in 72 hours, leaving none for the rest of us. Happily, there is a homemade antibiotic that you can make that does work halfway decent. That's cordial silver. Mr. Beck's machine, I've tested it. Again, bubonic plague and cholera both, anthrax both. It does the job. It does a very fine job again. So we at least we do have a little bit of a hope. But understand, folks, once the symptoms manifest themselves, you are dead. If you're not on the antibiotics or the colloidal silver prior to being exposed, you are dead, plain and simple. Over the last few days, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, has actually called me in to one of their powwows. And one of the FEMA agents is in Columbus, Ohio, very white, very shakily. He handed me his orders. He said, Mr. Harris, I got nothing to hide. You know as well as I do. Their orders are: 1, if an area is hit with a biological attack, 1, shut off the electricity to the area. 2, shut off all communications to the area. 3, drop a hypobarometric fuel air bomb onto the area. Rome Veronica Airport, they also stationed 3 C-130s, and these aircraft had a special guide rails just facilitated swift loading of the fuel air bombs. They also moved in 3 Spectre 130 gunships. These are the ones with the miniguns mounted sideways. They give you an idea of a minigun. You could roll it up, do a 1-second burst, put a bullet in every square foot on the football field. Those are used for crowd control. Basically, they're used for controlling population coming out of any population coming out of the city. But the frightening thing is also, folks, we're already under biological attack. We have already aircraft. The military has already signed rules and regulations where they can test biologicals upon the civilian populace to see their effectiveness. They have been spraying biologicals on us to detect their effectiveness for the last several months. There have been trails, vapor trails, been seen across the country. The vapor trail, similar to the high altitude trail you see coming from an airliner, but much lower down, way too low for a contrail to form. And they fly over, the plane flies over, the next couple of days people start getting sick. Coming to find out they've been dumping out JP8. We've been testing the JP8. Come to find out JP8 is an excellent nutrient media for Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Causes all kinds of nasty little infections in your lungs, skin infections. We had a little community up in Northern California. 1 day, 2 days before that, nobody had any pneumonia. None. No, none at all. Next day, we had over 200 cases of pneumonia. Strep pneumo from the same bug. And an aircraft had been seen flying over that area 2 days before. The next valley over, we had another little community. They all come down with Haemophilus influenza. Get this, as a microbiologist, if somebody comes into the hospital, I'm working in a laboratory, and one day I see a person with H flu, Haemophilus. The next day I see 2 people. The next day I see 4 people. The next day I see 6 people with it. Then we know we've got a spread. We've got an epidemic breaking out. But listen, folks, if you don't see nothing for days, months, then all of a sudden you go into your emergency room, you got 200 or 300 people with Haemophilus influenza. That's not an accident, folks. That is deliberate attack, deliberate being sprayed. What was the common denominator? 2 days before, an aircraft was seen flying over that area, spraying out a mist. Also, Jasper, Arkansas, last fall, we had several children in the playground started complaining, burning skin. Their skin was burning all over. One little girl was screaming. They thought her brains was on fire. The first people who was victims, the EMT, showed up, tried to take care of her. They also succumbed to it. They was in a hospital for several days. The only common denominator we found, an aircraft flew over a few minutes before, spraying out a mist. Folks, we are in a time right now that the military is going in an all-out crash course of defending against biological warfare. But the question that I must ask, who are they defending? There is no money for our civilians, not 1 penny. Dugway Proving Grounds, $400 million has just been jumped in for, and the only thing they're working on is anthrax, plague, tularemia, cholera, typhoid. They shut down their entire virology department. They have shut down their entire mycology department, their entire parasitology department. Everything has been related to 1 set or 5 organisms, and that is it. Also, with the treaty that was signed and the president here a couple years ago, they can test civilian populations with biological warfare. And folks, this goes back a long time. When I was with the company years ago, we released strep pneumo inside the subway cities of New York City. Then we would check in the emergency rooms over the next few days how many people came down with strep pneumo, and just seeing how effective a biological warfare agent it could be. We have tested it on civilian populations for many, many years. This is not a new thing. There's not 1 cent in here in this whole $400 million for 1 penny for any civil defense out here whatsoever. Not 1 red copper. Nothing. So the question is, who are they defending?